did you originally get into being a TERF?
Good thing is I recently wrote a Substack post about this, well, recently, back in July, to sort of get it straight in my head, because I was like, how did I end up here? I think, like, all of this, like, sort of trans and gender stuff, like, growing up sort of because I was like a teen and a young adult when it was starting to sort of proliferate in society, and because I was a lesbian, it sort of felt like I should go along with it, right? But and I did to an extent, like I was kind of like, oh yeah, trans rights, it's the next thing after gay. But it never like completely sat right with me. It never There was always a bit of skepticism. I would always read this stuff about trans women are women, and I would kind of be like, okay, I don't really believe that though. And I think inside I thought that other people also didn't really believe that. I thought that it was this social nicety and we're just all being nice and everything. But still, I sort of went along with it. And I actually was on Reddit, and I actually was on this like lesbian subreddit, which every second post was about trans this, trans that. And I was like, it was starting to bother me, but I didn't really let it bother me. But through that subreddit, actually, people were complaining about like gender critical. I don't know if you ever knew there was like that gender critical subreddit, and people were saying it was this terrible place of hatred and all this. And but I thought, well, the name of it doesn't sound that bad. Like, shouldn't that be, I don't know, something good, critical of gender, whatever. So I found it, and I think that's sort of when the dam really broke. I was like, oh, there are other people saying this stuff. There are other people thinking this stuff. I'm not alone, right? And so I realized sort of how important it is to realize that you're not alone and to connect with people, because until then, you almost can't even be honest with yourself. That you truly think this way and that you're not really this like some horrible person. Because I always just thought, oh, I'm just secretly just kind of bad and evil or something like that, right? Like, why don't I accept this? So just to see other people voicing these concerns was really huge. I think I spent like a few months sort of reading there and posting there and all this, and I could see people sharing screenshots of Twitter. Oh, there's my dog. Uh, so I realized Twitter was kind of where it was all really going down, right? So eventually, like early 2019, I want to say, I went through so many Twitter accounts, actually. Like, I kept getting on there, and they would grow a little bit, nothing huge, but I would get like all nervous and not want that, and I was being anonymous and stuff at the time. And eventually I just decided to just start using my name and my face, and the rest is history, pretty much.
Yeah. When you were, I'm really curious, when you were first exploring the gender critical subreddit and all that, when did you experience any blowback from like friends or online or anything?
So it hasn't been actually that bad, but my first experience of blowback was with my own partner, who might be hearing me
Oh,
right now.
really? Okay.
Yeah, sort of, I think like spring 2019, I started to bring this topic up with people. Like, I have three sisters, I was bringing it up with them, and I was bringing it up with my partner, and I was really worried about my sisters, because two of them are younger than me, and I thought, oh no, they've definitely been indoctrinated, like, they're gonna think I'm a horrible bigot. But, no, actually, we started talking, and that was okay. There she is. And I brought it up to my partner. I was like, I think I started with like the trans kids thing. I was just like, wouldn't we have been trans kids and stuff? And I also started bringing up sports and all of this. And at first, it actually wasn't that good. Like, at first, she was like, what are you talking about? Why are you being so weird and bigoted? And we have to stick by them and all this. And I eventually, like, I was leaving for a haircut at the time. And I was like, look, it's fine. We'll talk about it when I get home. And so I left, and by the time I got out of my haircut, she was texting me like, okay, no, you're right. You're not a bad person. I know that. You must have thought about this. It's fine. I agree and all this. So we smoothed that over right away. So that was the first kind of moment of like, oh my God, this is going to get me in trouble. But that's completely fine now.
Let's talk a little bit more about, kids transitioning. So, I mean, for you, it sounds like you were super aware of that really early, because you said you brought that up to your partner, right? Sort of about like, maybe we would have been transitioned. What for you stands out as like the most disturbing or the creepiest aspect of transitioning kids?
Just the whole thing. Just that we could look at a child and say, some way that that child acts or thinks or plays or talks indicates that like there's something so terribly wrong with their body that we have to literally halt its development and then change the course of its development, which leads to sterilization. So just the entire idea that there could be something so wrong. You look at a kid that's perfectly healthy and you say, nope, you were meant to be the opposite sex. I think that is completely deranged. And I mean, I will say I wasn't aware of it early enough. Like, I think that's one thing I never bought into, but it wasn't on my radar early enough. It was only, like I said, maybe 2018, 2019, where I think I started to hear about it. And that's this conversation I had with my partner was actually even quite a long time before we had that sort of fight over my change views. This was maybe 6 months prior, where I sat down and I just said, well, like, wouldn't that have been us? Because I was a huge tomboy, she was a huge tomboy, and initially what she told me was like, well, no, it's different. It's somehow different, and I kind of wanted to believe that, so I said, yeah, that's right, it must be. But I got to thinking, like, how, right? Whenever you read any stories about a child that has been transitioned, it's based on nothing but stereotypes. There is literally nothing else. The parents, the psychologists, whatever involved with that kid will say, oh, they like these kinds of toys and they like this kinds of dress. And so to me, to transition and do such extreme social and medical interventions on a child for like liking and saying the wrong thing is so horrendous. And I know sometimes it can be more extreme. I know sometimes a child might be very insistent. I understand that. Maybe like this phenomenon was around even before the modern trend. I get it. But for the most part, those kids, if just allowed to grow up, would grow out of it. And a good portion of them would be gay. Like we know that. We have tons of studies on that. So for us to suddenly have just decided, no, that means they're the opposite sex, it really means you are transing away the gay in a really big way. And the fact that people don't see that, I just don't understand. I don't understand. I know there's lots of people who just simply aren't aware that this is happening at the scale it's happening at. But when they know and when they still choose to support it, I don't know how they can do that.
Yeah, it's so hard to wrap my brain around. I mean, I've had discussions with, people in my life who believe in that, and they've got examples in their own lives of, so-called trans kids, and they are firm believers that this is the right thing, and that to question it is to be hateful of those kids, right. Which couldn't be more wrong. It couldn't be more backwards, because in reality, I mean, there are well-meaning people who, like you said, just don't fully get it. They don't understand what's going on here.
Yep.
They've had the wool pulled over their eyes. But then there are the activists who know, and they're predatory in many ways, and they are really the worst enemies, if you could call it that, of so-called trans kids.
Yep.
So people like us are actually defending kids who identify as trans. That's something that people need to understand.
Yeah, well, we haven't given up on them. I feel like just letting them transition is like, well, okay, you're this lost cause, you're gonna amount to nothing, you're not gonna have a happy life if we don't let you do this. Versus I'm like, actually, no, that kid can very much have a happy life. They might be gay, they might not be. To me, I just wanted to point out, it's so crazy how quickly these activists went from, no, kids are not being transitioned, to yes, puberty blockers are good and cross-sex hormones are good. So, that was the blink of an eye. 1 second they were denying it, they were saying it's all just social transition, but now it's all good. And also, they always fall back on social transition, but that's, not good either. That is a, psychotherapeutic intervention that makes a child believe they are someone they're not.
Yes.
Name change, pronouns, it's better than putting them on puberty blockers, but that is the first step. Just don't lie to kids.
Right. It's so sinister to confuse children like that. And like you said, that's a really good point about that. It's almost throwing away their chances at a future happy, healthy life, because they're saying that there's this trade-off. Yes, puberty blockers, hormones, they have all these horrible side effects, not to mention surgery, right? Because that's also happening to minors.
It is, yep.
Yeah. And so the activists say, there are all these, potential downsides, but it's really necessary, because otherwise they might kill themselves, or otherwise they won't be able to transition as successfully later on. So it's a great point that you make. It's a very much throwing away the prospects of the kid having it all. They can have a healthy, happy, full life and an intact body and their fertility and everything.
Yeah, their fertility, their sexual function even, their ability to have adult romantic relationships and children if they want to. This is just such a sticking point for me, because I grew up happy and healthy, and I had gender dysphoria, but I wasn't like convinced I was a boy. But had somebody told me that, like that, I would have hung on to that and been like, oh, that's the solution to my problems. Like, oh, you mean I actually get to be a boy? Because I hung out with boys. I like liked boy things. I wore boy clothes. Like that's the kind of kid I was. And so because this idea wasn't in my head, I was okay. I grew up, and I wouldn't say I grew out of it. I'm still obviously a lesbian and sort of gender nonconforming, and that's fine. But if somebody planted that seed there, yeah, maybe if you asked me if I'm depressed because I can't transition, I would have answered yes. They have all these self-report surveys about kids saying they're suicidal and all this because the messaging is out there, because they're told that they should be. And that's not to downplay that there's real distress. There is. But, I just don't think these people remember being kids and teenagers. Like, as a teenager, I tried to find things to be moody about. Even though my life was happy and fine, like, if I had that thing that, oh, I'm trans and that's why I'm feeling just awkward, as all teens do, I probably would have answered a survey like, yeah, I'm totally suicidal because I can't transition and all this. Again, not to make light of it and downplay it, but people don't remember being kids. They aren't around kids. I don't understand how they can, how they can say this stuff.
Yeah, I mean, it's like you say, if you offer a kid, an angsty kid or teen, this is the one solution. This is the reason for all your angst, all your problems, all your insecurities. And not only is it the reason behind it, it will also give you this elevated social status, and it will give you
Yep.
this battle to fight. And that's what kids want also. They want like something to fight for and
They
something to
do.
stand up for. Like they do want meaning in their lives. And like you said, they look for stuff to be anxious about. I mean, I remember that as well. And the contagion aspect of it, because like you mentioned, this may have existed to some degree, but it was really often boys, little
Hmm.
boys,
Yes.
and not the teenage girl cohort that we see now.
Yeah, it
Um,
was like 3 to 1 boys, and that has just flipped. That has completely flipped on its head. And so, again, for clinicians to look at those stats and those numbers and not see an issue uh, is nonsense. It's like you have to explain those numbers. You have to explain why it flipped. Here in Canada, I look at a lot of stats out of Canada, and like the one kind of main study that we have shows that same ratio. Girls made up like 75% of kids at a gender clinic and boys 25. And also another issue we have here is Indigenous kids are incredibly overrepresented. Don't quote me, I think the numbers were something like they made up 17% of kids at gender clinics. They're like 5% of our population. And another issue is like a lot of these kids are in care. They're in foster care. So they don't have adults looking out for them. So that's like our country is all about reconciliation with the Indigenous people, and now you're these kids who do have issues and who need care. You're throwing at a certain percentage of them just the idea of transition, and this is going to solve your problems, right? So it's so
yeah.
backwards.
Yeah, and that's interesting because there's often this refrain from gender critical people actually or conservatives that says that trans, trans identified kids or people are just these white privileged upper class, middle class, whatever people. But, also in my anecdotal experience, that's not quite right. That's not quite accurate. So it's it's something that has proliferated beyond that. It's not just this boredom, this elitist boredom. It is really, especially the picture you paint of the kids in care, indigenous kids so disproportionately represented. It's like this
It
predatory thing.
is. Yeah, it is predatory. And yeah, you're right. Like there is, I think, a certain percentage, especially maybe teenagers, that sure you could paint them as privileged white kids, but a lot of the kids swept up in this are very, very vulnerable. They are Indigenous kids. There's a lot of autistic kids that are swept up in this. They are very overrepresented. There's plenty of studies sort of on the pro-trans side that admit to this. And they tried to find these silly convoluted reasons for why gender dysphoria and autism go hand in hand without looking at just the most obvious things like social awkwardness and kids wondering why they don't fit in and what could the solution be, right? So yeah, there's a lot of vulnerable kids swept up in this, which is why like in my sort of just commentary and stuff, I really do feel for them. Like I really feel like they're being led astray, and I really blame the adults that are doing this, the teachers, the counselors, the doctors, even their own parents. I understand that there's this sort of feedback loop, right? Everybody blames everybody else. The parents say the counselor told me to do this. The doctors say, well, the parents wanted me to do this. That everyone's blaming each other. and it never stops anywhere. Right? So I think everybody needs to be held really accountable for this. And I think they will be. I think the lawsuits will come. Hopefully. They're starting. So we'll see.
Yes, they are starting. We're getting a lot of news now that, the lawsuits are beginning. And I also wanted to ask you, you've had quite a different path than a lot of other gender critical writers because like you said, you were able to kind of seamlessly, or well, maybe it wasn't quite seamless, but you were able to transition right into this topic without sort of a big cancellation or a bunch of drama, which is nice. Um, and have you had any harassment or, have you experienced any kind of attempts to cancel you?
I've had tons of harassment, of course, being online and being on Twitter and on all this, which has been, I think, great for my mental health. I'm not joking. Having to deal with what I get which has been better lately, having to deal with just random trolls saying stupid things and not letting it get to me and not caring about it has been fantastic. Like I used to get when I first got Twitter, the reason I kept like leaving is because I was even just too anxious to look at notifications and see what people were saying, right? So now I just don't care. Attempts to cancel me from my writing and work, no, there really haven't been. Like I said, I think I'm just really lucky that people don't really know who my clients are. I think if you tried to look deep enough into me, you could probably make a connection with some and try to mess things up. I did used to be worried. Like one of the reasons I did take a break for a whole year, which is why I think I like saw your message like a year late eventually when I came back on, was because I was starting with a new content company, which was a really good opportunity for me, but I got scared. I got cold feet. I thought, what if they look into me? What if clients complain to them about me and my online activities? So that was part of the reason why I left. Another reason was I just didn't really want, and this sounds silly to say, I didn't want like a higher profile, and this was back when I had a couple thousand followers, so it wasn't even huge at all, but I was really not interested in attracting a lot of attention. I had a few requests for podcasts and stuff, and that sort of freaked me out. And so I was like, I'm just going to take a break from all of this for a bit. It was just a bit too much, and I got to working with that company and stuff, and eventually I just couldn't help it. Like, I just was pulled back in. I was like, I don't care what comes of this. I think I'm pretty safe in my work and my writing. Like, I have to keep speaking out. And shortly after coming back was when I did start getting opportunities to write under my own name on this topic. It wasn't like paid or anything yet, but I started writing for gender dissent, started to like look into a lot of stuff in Canada regarding gender stuff. And that was great to actually start putting that out there. So I stuck with it.
Yeah, yeah, wonderful. I mean, I'm so glad that you did. And yeah, it's definitely there are jobs that you can have, like in my experience, where people don't look into that or they don't know, and it's not been as bad as I thought it would be. Since getting canceled. Um, but also I'm curious, you mentioned that you did feel, you had gender dysphoria when you were younger. What did that feel like for you? What was that experience?
Well, I actually wrote something about this for Colin Wright's Reality's Last Stand, where I went through the like DSM criteria for like childhood gender dysphoria, and there's like a few points, I forget how many, and I would have hit basically every single one. Not so much the kind of like physical, but when I did start going through puberty and developing, how much, I don't know how much of that you chalk up to obviously that's just an awkward time for everyone, and how much you put towards I did feel like it was kind of weird, like I did see my body a bit differently. Definitely just like if given the option would have wished I was a boy. Felt like I was different, obviously. I had all my friends were boys. I felt very much like I fit in much better with them. I didn't really fit in with the girls at all. The kind of stuff that kids today will say that they'll point to and be like, yep, definitely a trans kid. So, and then, through puberty, as the studies from, the 80s and 90s show, it sort of cleared up. I accepted that I'm a woman and a girl and it's fine to be this way. And I think that's what's so sad because as I was growing up in the 90s, we were getting the messaging that, like, it's okay to just be however you are, and I feel like we've really gone off the rails and we sort of lost that messaging, and now it's like, oh, you feel uncomfortable in your body, you feel uncomfortable developing and going through puberty, like that means there's something very wrong with you. So
Yeah,
yeah, that's why I
yeah.
talk about the kid thing a lot. I just can't believe what's happening.
Yeah, it's like you said, the messaging used to be "it gets better." That was the slogan when I was in high school
Yeah,
for kids dealing with all kinds of issues, but especially kids who were gay or lesbian, and "it gets better." That was the slogan. Whereas
I
now it's
remember.
yeah, and
Yeah.
it's almost like it gets worse now because unless you do these medical interventions and try to bend the fabric of reality and deny, who you really are.
And that's what it is. It's funny that you said like that's they're setting kids up for kids and young people for like an impossible task. It's like they're asking them to bend the fabric of reality. Like you can't change your sex, you
Yeah.
know? So
Yeah.
yeah, it's quite cruel.
It's very cruel. It's so I can't understand how you could tell a child how you could twist their truth, like twist the truth with a kid. I mean, I've worked with kids in different jobs and they're so malleable. They're so curious and I mean, of course they're also like disobedient and bratty and all that stuff too sometimes, but
Love them.
yeah, gotta love them. But yeah, it's like they're just sponges soaking up what they're being taught. They look to you as the complete authority, which is why sometimes I guess they're bratty. But they look to us for to help make sense of the world.
They do.
And for adults to tell them that they can alter this and to say like, this is the wrong puberty, we can put you through the right puberty if you want, and giving them this choice. And it's funny because you also talked about how everyone's putting the responsibility on someone else. They're also putting the responsibility on the kids' shoulders because they're saying,
They are.
you're choosing this, even though it's not something anyone should ever be able to choose, in my opinion, to avoid
Yeah.
puberty. But
They are. That's a point I've been talking about a lot lately. That essentially, at the end of the day, this blames the kid. Like, if they go through these transitions and if they come out the other end, all the teachers, all the clinicians, all the doctors that help them along the way are just going to wash their hands of this kid. They don't care what happens to them. It's the parents who are left, parents and family who are left, like, helping this person if they grow up and realize they've done something wrong. Or even if they insist that it's still the right choice, but they still have to deal with the medical aspects of all of this stuff, right? And it does put it on the kid. A while ago I was writing this article on like the castrati. This isn't totally random, I promise. They were these, young boys in the 17th, 18th centuries who would be castrated to preserve their singing voice. And so I said at the end, like, obviously today we view that as quite barbaric, but we're doing the same thing. And at least back then, it wasn't, people recognized it wasn't the choice of the boy. It was usually like their parents because they were very poor or whatever. And today it's like, well, no, we do this to little boys, but we say it was your choice. So you don't even have that excuse of saying, well, we did this to try and give you a better life and fame and fortune and money. We just did this because when you were 5, you said you wanted to wear a dress and here you are now, but it was your choice. So it's not our fault. And yeah,
yeah,
again, that's when you really think about it, that's just unimaginably cruel.
it is. And what an
Yeah.
interesting analogy too. It reminds me of something that I in a college class that I had where I think we were reading like the existentialist philosophies. It might have been Sartre, not sure how to pronounce that, but
Sartre.
yeah. And I remember the professor saying the difference between I guess maybe he was talking about postmodernism. I'm not sure. This wasn't my field in college, but so I'm not super familiar with these philosophical terms, but I remember the professor saying, it's the difference between how it used to be in the old world was, okay, kids, we're going to grandma's house. You don't have a choice. You have to see grandma. Now it's you have to want to go to grandma's house. And they're putting this burden on kids. That really struck me as having truth to it because it's like we've decided, I guess, culturally that we shouldn't force kids to do things. So now, but you have to force kids to do things because we are
Yes.
their caretakers and we have to. So it's like now they have to want it and they have to like choose it's this burden on them, really.
It is. They've been parentified. They really have been parentified in a way. It's a total reversal of like the roles of parents and kids, because now they have to make those tough choices, and oftentimes like the parents that do this to their kids, like I mean, not to rag on them too hard, but like it's really weird. You are parentifying them, and oftentimes you use them kind of for like emotional support, and you're using them as like these emotional support kids to like get attention. And yeah, I just don't know how they can do this to them. It's a total reversal of like the relationship, the parent-child relationship,
Yeah.
essentially.
Yeah, it
Yeah,
is. And like you said, some of the more nefarious parents are using it for attention, using it for their careers. They can write books now, My Trans Child, and imagine how much more entrenched that makes it for the kid. I mean, even
yeah,
just changing pronouns is going to make it so much
yeah.
harder for that kid to switch back. Even
I think,
with, yeah, go ahead.
yeah. I think some definitely are doing that. Like, again, I don't want to be too hard on them. I know that this is such a hard situation for parents to be in. I have many who have kids, I have many friends who have kids who are trans identified, and it's such a fine line they have to walk. You know, these are parents who don't accept it, but if they, push too hard, they're gonna risk that relationship. And like what's so sad to me is a lot of these kids are teenagers, teenage girls especially, and that's a time where you might have a hard relationship with your mom, like just naturally. But then generally you come out of it, you grow into an adult, and your mom's your best friend, oftentimes if things went well. And I just feel like this trans stuff really puts such a wedge in that makes it impossible to come out of that. Because worst case scenario, you've either alienated your daughter because you've said no and you've put your foot down to anything, or, she went off and actually made the changes, and now your relationship is just ruined. So what this is doing to that relationship is hard, and like I definitely don't envy the parents who even maybe felt their only choice was to go along with it. But there definitely are some that splash their kids all over TikTok and social media and use it for woke points, and there definitely are nefarious intentions behind that for sure.
Yeah. And I mean, one of the saddest things is seeing the parents who, like you said, don't know how to stop this and they don't know what to do.
Yeah.
And I mean, in Canada, you had, Rob Hoogland. I feel like I'm not allowed to say his name, but the parent who there's a gag order so on the media, so that's why sometimes his name
Yeah.
is not
His name
used.
is out there, yeah.
Yeah, it's out there. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, if people don't know, he actually went to jail for disobeying the judge's gag order because he didn't want his daughter to transition. He wanted to refer to her as his daughter and not as his
Yep.
son. The mom, they were divorced. The mom was in favor of the transition. Do you know any updates on him, on that situation?
I don't know any more recent updates, but one thing I do know about that situation, which I was almost shocked to learn, is that the psychologist who was involved in that case, who was transitioning this girl, he's named Dr. Wallace Wong. This is a guy who you can find stuff online. He was bragging about the vast number of children in care in BC he had transitioned. So that's like when I was talking about I was going to bring him up earlier when I was talking about that, is he has bragged that there's just hundreds of them that he's transitioned. And like I said, in BC as well, Indigenous kids are overrepresented. So like how many of them have you transitioned? So to find out he was connected with that case was actually quite mind-blowing. Like, of course he was. And that girl too, the father had said she was likely autistic. She had a lot of just emotional trouble, and he definitely thought that that's where this is coming from. And he actually, I think, was successful in putting like an emergency order she was going to be injected with testosterone one day, and he was able to kind of stop that. But then I think since then, I think she has started transitioning, if I recall correctly.
Mhm.
So it's very sad. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's very sad in her case and all the others. As you said, the psychologist is maybe kind of psychopath. Like he's one of the more, nefarious players, which there definitely are in this. But in terms of the parents who are trying to deal with this situation, I ask this to multiple of my guests. I'm curious what you would say. Would you what words would you say, or do you have any advice for parents who are trying to, prevent the transition of their kid, but they're surrounded by all this propaganda, and maybe they're being told that they're a bigot, and like you said, it's driving a wedge in between their family. Do you have any advice as someone who obviously writes about this and also went through a period of gender dysphoria as a youngster? What do you have any advice for the parents?
I don't know if I'm in like the best position to give advice, but I'll say like what I've seen with a lot of the parents I know who are going through this, they get so much help when they connect with other parents that are also going through this. Like that's kind of the main benefit I've seen come to them, and together they can really talk about it. There's so many networks now. There's like PIT, there's Parents with Inconvenient Truth About Trans. So yeah, I actually know quite a few people, and none of them have really, they like having me as an example for their daughters because oftentimes their daughters are lesbians or they're just gender nonconforming, and they try to tell them, look, you can be this way, or they like knowing about other people that they can point them to and tell them, maybe give this person a listen, right? Because a lot of these kids, they're on YouTube, they're listening to all the trans influencers, right? So I think, perhaps if I had advice, it would be just look up all the sources you can. Like there are even now lots of trans identified people who talk against this. So it's it's such a fine line, and each situation is so unique because you just never know what's going to like drive the kid away. But the best parents I've seen handle this is just, the ones who have stuck firm to like, no, I'm not going to confirm you and call you the other sex and all this, but who still keep that relationship open and who don't push too hard, who maybe let their opinions known here and there, but they aren't trying to kind of argue and stuff like that. I've seen that that can be pretty effective because, yeah, if you alienate the kid, it's just, if you lose them to the people who want to transition them, it's just, it's just gone. So, again, yeah, every situation is so unique, but like just linking up with other parents who are going through this is really, really helpful from what I've seen.
Another thing that came to mind before we kind of wrap up in a couple minutes, is the idea of there's this slogan from the trans movement I heard a long time ago that they said, well, gay is who you go to bed with, and trans is who you go to bed as. But I don't know what you think of that slogan, but it's more of a explainer. But
Yeah.
the thing with that I always it boggles my mind is that trans medicine is destroying their ability to go to bed at all. I mean, so to speak.
Exactly. That was my thinking, yeah.
Yeah, so it's so creepy because it's like there and people don't know this. I mean, this is what I try to spread the word about is like these surgeries, especially, I mean, hormones and puberty blockers too, but it's like these surgeries are it's hard to even say like, oh, this one was botched or this one was botched because just by nature they
Mm-hmm.
are, you could say, botching you. I mean, it's,
Yep, exactly.
and like I've talked to several men who've undergone vaginoplasty where they've had, their penis inverted. And it is a lie that they will be able to have a healthy, normal sex life.
It is, yeah.
Yeah, and it's crazy that surgeons are lying to them, therapists are lying to them, the internet, trans activists are all telling them this. And they are, like you said, many times vulnerable people in very vulnerable situations who have no idea. They have no idea what they're getting into, and then whatever they were searching for, it's just taken away. It's just taken away from them.
It is, yeah. And so basically about that slogan, I mean that's definitely like half of what I would say. Like you're not gonna go to bed at all, sorry. Like which it's very sad not to laugh about it. And then the other thing I would say about it is the concept of trans as we sort of envision it today. It just completely it destroys the idea of gay in the first place. Like if your sex is self-identified, then, sexual orientation doesn't really even make sense. It's completely antithetical to this idea, I would say in the past, there wasn't such a conflict when people didn't deny biological sex and just said, okay, I want to live as a woman. I want to live as a man. Whatever people feel about that, I just feel like as long as people were still rooted in reality, there wasn't this conflict. And that's kind of why, as much as I write about that, the trans movement did not come from the gay movement, like I'll argue that all day long. I will admit that at a certain point they did link up because there was kind of just these, people at the edges of society, sexual wise. And it sort of made sense when we were all rooted in reality. But then the trans activist went off the deep end and decided that even just sex is self-identified. You say you're a woman, you're a woman. Well, then, sexual orientation makes no sense anymore at all. So for that slogan to be used as an explainer, yeah, it honestly doesn't, because it's a total contradiction.
That's a good point. That's a really good
Yeah.
point. And I think when I had Artie Morty on the podcast, he's a gay commentator on all this stuff, writes on all this stuff, and
From Canada.
yes, also from Canada. That's right. And he talked about how back in the day, before, earlier times, not sure exactly when he was referring to, maybe 90s.
The before times.
Yeah, the before times, that in the gay community, there were trans people because they were gay. So they were
Yes.
they actually did fit in. And now it's like, well, Caitlyn Jenner, for example, Bruce Jenner, he's got nothing to do. He's I think a straight male with a
Yes.
fetish. But to the outside observer, they have been led into thinking this is under the same umbrella, and
Yes.
this is
Yep.
all part of gay rights, even though someone like Bruce Jenner has nothing to do with it at all. He's just a fetishistic straight man.
Yes, that's right. It's a fetish. Yeah. Yeah, that's a really good point, that there was this, kind of idea of you can be so gay you're trans in a way in the past, especially when maybe it was easier for a super butch woman to just live as a man, to be seen as one, even if she wasn't like really trans, or like a really, really effeminate man, to just kind of go all the way and think that that may be easier to live that way, or maybe they had gender dysphoria. So yeah, that was definitely a part of our community. Like, I consider trans people who are homosexual to be part of the gay community. I have friends like that, like they are part of us, versus the kind of the tea that is causing all the trouble, in my opinion, is the fetishistic straight men. I think if they had never been emboldened to join this community then things wouldn't be like quite as bad as they are right now. That's kind of the whole problem. And they could still have their cross-dressing, they could still have their fetish clubs, there could still be the odd one here and there in society. It's the reason that I sort of talk about this and fight is because it's become this massive trend, is because it's taken over all the institutions and it's taken over the schools and everything, right? There's plenty of people and movements in this world that I don't agree with, that I don't spend my time writing about and talking about. But I think early on I could see how big it had already gotten without my knowing, and where it was going. And now it's this massive conversation on a political level, on a social level, and yeah, gotta keep talking about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And they're denying the truth, like we talked about, right? So it's a big lie that they're asking us all to take part in. And like you said, it conflicts with gay rights, it conflicts with treating children as they should be treated, taking proper care of them, protecting them, all that stuff. So Eva, I think we'll wrap it up there, but thank you so much for your time, and I really enjoyed this speaking with you. Thank you so much for doing it. And to everyone listening, please check out Eva's writing. I will link below her Substack, her writing on other platforms, and give her a follow on Twitter.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. I'm so glad we did this.
Awesome. Me too. Thanks.